much. And a keyboard guest as well. And what is your name? Alan. Alan on keyboard. Thank you. It is my honor to get to introduce our speaker for today, and I have to admit this is a bit of a Christmas present for me. We have Reverend Robert Brumet, who's the former chairman of pastoral studies at Unity Institute. He taught courses in pastoral care, spiritual counseling, transpersonal psychology, prayer and meditation. And I have to say he was my favorite teacher in school. He's been a mentor for many years. He's the author of 4 books, including 2 of my favorites, Finding Yourself in Transition and Birthing a Greater Reality. And I do think that Robert was a new monastic well before that word was created. That's a word that we've just been introduced to lately, and I'm sure he'll be talking more about that today. He's a teacher of insight meditation, spiritual direction, and was the 2012 recipient of the Unity Worldwide Ministries Light of God Expressing Award for outstanding service to the Unity movement. And I have to share one more thing about Robert. Attending convention over the summer in Austin, he was one of the last speakers, one of the last workshops of the week, and there was a church full of licensed Unity teachers and ministers, and someone had asked, how many of you have ever been taught by Reverend Robert Brumet? And pretty much everybody in the room raised their hand. So this is, and for decades he's been teaching Unity ministers. So with that, please welcome Reverend Robert Brumet.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I am so appreciative to visit one of my Unity homes once again. I've spoken at this ministry many times. Actually, I spoke the first time when you were over on Kentucky Avenue, wasn't that many years ago? And then when you were somewhere north of the river. So I followed you around all over the place. And I feel like my heart is in this ministry, and I keep in touch with most everyone here, either through Sean or through somebody I know that's attending here. So thank you for being here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you one of my passions, which is that of reawakening ancient wisdom and bringing it to bear in our world today. Because that really, I believe, is what's needed. We've lost our way, and we need to awaken to the truth, the timeless truth, and at the same time recognize that we live in a time that's unique, and that what worked 10 years ago and 50 years ago and 100 years ago may not work now, and yet the same timeless truth is applicable. So that's our challenge, is to take what's timeless and to put it to work in our lives in the realm of time and space. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about this morning, is about the spirit of Christmas that's timeless, and that spirit of Christmas that's brand new right here and right now. And of course, in Unity, we recognize that Christmas, the birth of Jesus, is symbolic. It's symbolic of the Christ consciousness awakening into the world of time and form. So it's important to remember that we're not talking about the birth of the Christ consciousness, because the Christ consciousness is eternal. It always was, it always will be. The Christ consciousness is what you are. It's what each one of us really is. And there's no single word that can capture it, but it's pure love, pure grace, pure beauty, wisdom, and power, beyond anything you can even imagine with the human mind, you see. So what we're looking for, we already are. And what we're doing in our spiritual journey is to awaken what we already are and to bring it to bear into our life at this present time. So that's the great paradox, is it's new and it's very old. It's ancient, timeless, and it's here for us to invent for the first time ever. So our work is to cultivate the manifestation of the Christ presence into our lives in the world of time and form. Into our lives, our work lives, our relational lives, our healing guidance, whatever it is that's going on in our life that's calling us, that's our journey. And the journey is to awaken the Christ within that context. Now, the ego is a word that gets used a lot in spiritual circles. And I'm just going to go ahead and define it in a real general way. The ego is simply what we think we are. It's who we think we are. It's who we've been taught to be, you see. And we're taught that all I am is, as Walt Whitman put it, somewhere between my hat and my boots. This is the sum total of me. And I live and I die, and that's all there is to it. And that's what the world of appearances teaches us. That's what the culture tends to teach us. That's what the mind tends to believe, because that's all we can see. Yet we know that reality is far, far more than what we can see and even understand. So that's the journey. So let's take a look at the Christmas story itself to find some clues as to how we can begin to prepare for the manifestation of the Christ presence in your life in whatever way is relevant for you. So besides Jesus, who is the perfect manifestation, a symbol of the perfect manifestation of the Christ in the world of time and form, Mary, of course, is a very important player in this story. Mary, being a female, represents the soul, metaphysically. And by metaphysical, I simply mean that everything in the story refers to a part of ourself, an internal part of ourself. So Jesus represents the Christ consciousness. Mary represents the soul. And it represents the soul that's been preparing, the soul that's been purified, the soul that's done a lot of inner work in preparation for the birth and the manifestation of the Christ presence. And in the story, Mary is a virgin. And again, whether you take that literally or not is not important in this context. What's important is we recognize that purity is about doing the work of letting go of all of the illusions, the negativity, and the defilements that we've accumulated in our life experience. We have experiences, we learn things. Some of these experiences are difficult. Some of the things we learn are not true. And so purification is forgiving, releasing, letting go of all that's not true, all that's not real, you see. And that's a process. It takes time. It takes work. It's not easy, as you know. It's also interesting that the Christmas falls right almost exactly on top of the winter solstice. And of course, that's no accident. And metaphysically, what that means to me is that at the time of the deepest darkness is when the Christ presence is awakened. Now, darkness doesn't necessarily mean calamity and melodrama and all that. Darkness simply means not knowing. Darkness means I can't see my way right now. And that's very often what happens in the Advent experience, is that we're taken through a process that we may not understand exactly why we're going through it, you see. Mary had no idea why she was going through what she was going through. I mean, can you imagine what it would be like to hear the message that she got, you know? Like, you what, huh? You see, you got to be kidding. And yet we all say that in a certain way, don't we? That it's like, me, God, me, the Christ, you got to be kidding, you see. You are. Only you are not the Christ as Jesus was, because Jesus was a unique character, and you are a unique character. So you are the Christ in this time, in this place, manifesting the same Christ presence. Joseph. Joseph, being a man, being a male, represents the mind, the thinking, rational part of us. Joseph, bless his heart, was clueless as to what was going on. And it's understandable. I mean, you put yourself, you know, the father is who? You know, wait a minute now. But Joseph was a man of deep faith. He was a man of deep humility. And Joseph was really in touch with his intuition. And so that tells us a whole lot about what the work of the rational mind is. It's to not throw away our thinking, our logic, our understanding, but also to incorporate intuition, to touch the heart, not just the brain, not just the mind. So in the story, Joseph was warned in a dream not to tell Herod where the baby Jesus was. Because Herod, the ruler, the secular ruler, represents the ego, the personal will. The personal will is threatened by the Christ presence. It's threatened not because the ego is bad, but because it doesn't understand. It's afraid. The ego basically is derived out of fear. The ego is what we form as a way of coping with the fear of being what appears to be a separate human being in a very big, dangerous, hostile universe, you see. So I create this small sense of self to protect myself from what I believe is a threat out there. And if you're a little tiny child and you're living in a world that's dangerous, it's understandable why and how that gets formed. But that's not the truth. That's not the reality of who we are. The wise men came to visit Jesus to recognize once again the wise men were kings. Hello. Hi. The wise men were kings. They were wise men. They were astrologers. They studied deep spiritual matters. And that led them to the baby Jesus, as wisdom leads us to our Christ consciousness, but it also led them away from Herod. That's right. So the wisdom within us needs to protect the Christ child from the ego, because the ego wants to take over. The ego wants to say, oh yeah, I'll worship the Christ and put it on my resume and maybe make a lot of money off of it or whatever. You see, the ego wants to co-opt the spiritual work and serve it for its own purposes. So the shepherds also came. Shepherds were very humble. They were unlearned. They were simple people. So it's so interesting that the archetype of simplicity, pastoral shepherds, uneducated, and then these wise men that traveled for many, many miles and perhaps many years to find Jesus. What a breadth of humanity that Jesus was touching. So just to summarize this piece of it in a very practical way, what we are doing, what we want to do, what we are in the process of doing, I think each one of us, whether we even acknowledge it or not, it's happening to us. The very fact that you're here this morning, I think, is telling me that your soul is wanting to hear something that's really crucial in this particular message, whatever it may be for you. Maybe different things for different people. So, doing the soul work. Doing the soul work even if it's not easy. Doing the forgiveness work. Letting go of the past. Letting go of all condemnation. Not only condemnation of others, but condemnation of ourselves. That's what we need to forgive ourselves every bit as much as we need to forgive others. To invite the Christ consciousness in and to make room for it. It's so interesting, there was no room in the inn. We've heard that so many times. The world does not have a place for the Christ consciousness. We have to create it. We have to create it in our own life, because the world is not going to say, I welcome and I support your journey to spiritual awakening. It's going to be more like Herod. It's going to say, hey, that's really cool. Tell me how it's going. And we'll take care of it from there. There's an old joke once about Jesus and the devil are walking down the street. And this beautiful crystal ball rolls out in front of them. And, Satan says, what is that? And Jesus picks it up and looked at it, and he says, tell you what it is, it's pure truth. Pure, absolute truth. And the devil says, cool, let me organize that for you. Okay? Let me turn that into a religion. Okay? All right? Let me make some money off of that. Let's start a belief system and a hierarchy and a structure, et cetera, et cetera. So, again, I want to be real clear that the ego, I'm not demonizing the ego, but we need to be real wary of the ego's intentions. And to cultivate intuition, as Joseph did. To listen to our dreams, to listen to our intuition, to meditate and listen to our guidance, and practice listening to the soul. Because the soul, as wise and as powerful and as beautiful as it is also very gentle. It's like a very gentle flower in the springtime. Beautiful, incredible life, and yet it's fragile in the world of form. So it's our work to protect it, to cultivate discernment, intuition, and to keep doing the inner work in our own lives. And then I want to talk just very briefly about another aspect of the Christ consciousness. One is the personal aspect. The Christ comes to this planet one person at a time, in you, in you, in you, and in me, and you, and you. And it also comes in a collective way as well. There's a global Christ consciousness, and even a cosmic Christ consciousness, which we won't talk about this morning. But the global consciousness is, I think, captured so beautifully in the book that we have alluded to and that you've been working with somewhat, the new monasticism. And I'd like to read a little bit from that book, so bear with me, please. I don't like to stand up here and read to you, but yet I want to capture the essence of what the authors are saying in this book, because this is a way in which a movement in our contemporary culture can be used to support our awakening and our growth. It's somewhat like, I kind of liken it to a 12-step recovery process. If you want to recover from an addiction, it's really helpful to have some kind of a support group and some kind of a program that you're working. Likewise, if we want to recover from the addiction of the ego, if we want to join Humans Anonymous and awaken from the trance and the addiction to our humanity, then it can be helpful to have a supportive culture and in supportive environment. And that's really what much of this is in the new monasticism. So let's talk about a global spirituality. A quote from Beverly Lanzetta, who's a religious scholar. She says, "I use the term global spirituality to emphasize the emergence of a new planetary consciousness, breaking through traditional religious categories and disciplinary boundaries. And it is affecting all life studies and all systems. Global consciousness is revealing a new type of religious experience, what we might call interspiritual. That is, this interspiritual movement is giving rise to novel forms of spiritual practice and new ways of living and approaching the spiritual journey. We live at a time when on our cell phones we can hear the Dalai Lama, we can hear a Sufi master, we can hear a Hindu master, we can hear a Catholic priest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have quite literally the wisdom of the ages at our fingertips. So this is an awesome time in which we live. And yet the challenge is to use wisely. How do I choose my own personal journey in the midst of all of these options? So it's important to use discernment, and that's part of what the inner spiritual practice is about. I want to read a little bit more here about the book. Let's see, the New Monasticism. B.D. Griffiths. Anybody here have heard of him? He's no longer physically living, but he's a Catholic mystic that has written some really incredible and beautiful material. And he says, I want to express a new vision for monastics, one in which communities and individuals live spiritual lives independent of religious organizations. So he's talking about a monasticism independent of any denomination or religious organization. Independent of celibacy or overarching rules and dogmas, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a monasticism in which the rules are not imposed from the outside, but they arise from within us. It's an internal monasticism. Free to follow their own conscience and guidance of the Holy Spirit in living a sacred life. That's really what it's all about. It's about living a sacred life. United in the common cause of building a sacred world. So the commitment is to live a sacred life and to help build a sacred world. To be involved in contemporary life, to be involved in relationships, explore new ways of walking the spiritual path, and be committed to spiritual activism as necessary. So it's a monasticism that says, God first. The most important thing in my world is to create a sacred life and to bring that sacred life into this world and thereby bring a sacred world into being. And the way that I do that is with my own personal inner work and also by connecting with others that resonate with the same spirit of truth that we do. So listening, connecting, opening our minds, opening our hearts. I think I'll finish with one more quote here, and then we'll say that's enough quoting. If I can. Okay, our book is a rallying call for these new types of spiritual life and new types of community, lives dedicated to building a sacred world through commitment to one's spiritual maturity, to the growth of community life, and to living out these values fully engaged in the world. It stands as an authentic expression of our own experience, opening a vision that cuts across humanity's wisdom, traditions, bringing us into the midst of something new. While embedded in ancient wisdom traditions, it's beholden to none. It encompasses scientific truths, psychological truths, cultural insights, economic realities, and yet it goes beyond each and all of them. So it's a very powerful movement. I invite you, if you feel guided, to purchase the book, The New Monasticism, I guess it is, and to talk to your minister, Sean, talk to me, talk to anybody that's interested in this, if you are. And I am so happy to be able to be here and to share my passion with you and to feel your loving presence in your energy. And may the force be with you. Okay? Merry Christmas to you. Okay. Thank you.
We have a beautiful piece to share with you this morning. It is Pie Jesu by Andrew Lloyd Webber.